Hi, it's Dave Michaels from Talking Points, and I've got a great video here today. And the title of the video is, Will AI Doom the Industry Analyst? And this topic has been coming up. Didn't exist a little while ago, but it's coming up now. And I wanted to, set the stage basically that there are people saying that AI will replace analysts. And it's an interesting question because certainly AI will replace a lot of roles. But it really brings up or begs the issue of, can AI replace the industry analyst? Will AI replace the industry analyst? What industry analysts even do? What AI can do? How we deal with things like trust, judgment, and context. So to get to the bottom of this, I invited two spectacular guests that can guide me through these questions. And so let me introduce them and we'll get into the conversation. The first guest I want to introduce is Chris Irwin-Dudek. Many people already know him because he is the Vice President of Marketing Communications over at NICE. He's responsible for AR, analyst relations, and public relations. He's got some 20 years of analyst relations experience. And most importantly, in my opinion, he's the author of the book. He wrote a book called Bridging Innovation, the Critical Role of Analyst Relations in Business Success. So I see him as an AR specialist and so honored to have him in this video. And I needed somebody else. I was trying to think of who knows both sides of the story and kind of neutral. And I came up with Art Schoeller. Many of you remember Art Schoeller. He's a legend in the analyst community. He spent most of his time as an analyst at Forrest for I think 11 years. He did things like the wave reports and whatnot. He also worked at Gartner. He did Magic Quadrants. He worked at Yankee. So I think Gartner and Yankee were like 3 years each. And he also worked at on the industry side. He worked at AT&T Lucent, which became part of Avaya. He worked at Dictaphone, and he worked 4 years at Microsoft, something like that. So he's been around. He's retired now, but he and his dog are not in this fight. No dog in this fight. And so I thought he would be an interesting guest to bounce some of these same issues with. So with that, without further ado, let's get into this incredible video with these two guests. Thank you so much for joining me. I think this is going to be a great conversation. You two are going to have the most interesting perspectives on this topic. It's amazing because this topic didn't even exist a year ago, and all of a sudden I keep hearing it from different sources. And actually, I want to play this. I was listening to the podcast from the Pivot podcast, Kara Swisher and here we go. Okay, Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. They got into this and they said this. I'm just going to play a minute of this podcast, and then I'm going to go right to Chris and ask you your thoughts on this. Here we go.
Gartner has this amazing business where if you're a small regional bank trying to figure out should we use Azure or AWS, you call a stay-at-home mom who's learned everything about cloud companies, who lives in Madison, Wisconsin. She makes $200,000 a year. She works from 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon answering questions from clients, and Gartner charges First National of Oklahoma $120,000. Now that person, the CTO, and they do a good job. It's an amazing business. Stock has tripled since 2017. They do an amazing job. Now the CTO at First National of Oklahoma has figured out if they type in a thoughtful prompt, they can get the pretty much the exact same answer back for their $20 a month, GPT-5 Pro subscription. And since the beginning of the year, Gartner's stock has been cut in half. And I think AI is going to come after that business.
So Chris, GPT-5 versus Gartner, is this a fair match?
Listen, that's the actual question, right? So is AI coming after these jobs? In my opinion, without a doubt. Now, the question is who's going to win that battle? And there's a nuance there, right? That with all due respect, the podcaster didn't kind of lay out there, which is, ChatGPT today reports out on what it knows, right? We can put certain criteria in, there's certain facts that it checks, and it tells you kind of specifically what it sees in that data. Now, the issue is it doesn't allow for critical thinking, right? That analyst who understands the nuance of the conversations when a potential vendor is being asked about, right? An analyst will look the customer in the eye through, the online, exchange or what have you. They see the nonverbal. They understand that when someone is asking question 1, they're actually really asking question 7, right? They understand that they are a master at prompting, but it requires that human intervention, that critical thinking, to really understand and allow them to derive the value out of that answer. And that's something that I don't think AI has mastered just yet.
So, Art, you've been on both sides, the enterprise side and the analyst side. When you saw that video, what was your reaction?
Well, one of the things talked about was stock price. And I think that currently we're in the midst of a big bad bubble. Okay. I don't want to assess overall AI with my comments here, but at the end of the day, we're starting to see, even in the general press, the bubble word. And this is one of the signature events in terms of the classic hype cycle, which is a Gartner construct of reaching the peak of expectations. So yes, it's impacting stock prices. Companies have to say in their quarterly reports that they're doing AI. Okay. So I think that this is going to need to shake out over time. And there will indeed be an impact on the things that analyst firms do. But I think the ultimate answer is one that's shades of gray. So I want to reinforce what Chris has said about the expertise to assess and to actually interact with a client and take a look at their needs versus, are they just chasing the latest feature pixie dust that's in the market?
Yeah.
But here's the second point that I think is really, really critical. And Chris did say this, that AI reports on what it can get, okay? And that data about vendors, their feature functionality, their performance, their customer satisfaction, their service abilities, and whether or not they're good or bad, ain't out there, okay? Yeah. It just isn't out there. As an analyst, when I did Gartner Magic Quadrants and Forrester Waves, to put that questionnaire out to vendors and extract from them and interpret what they submitted and to question it and to validate it was a huge effort. And the data just isn't there. Now, also, I do want to say that there are other things that IT market research firms do than just vendor evaluation and vendor advice. For example, if we think of these companies, now some of them are bigger like Gartner, some are smaller and they don't do this, but you serve the vendors themselves. You serve, and the only one we're talking about so far is the end user and giving them advice. But a third market, perhaps a little tertiary, is investors. And in each of those categories, I'll throw out another example. Vendors, and I was a product manager for 5 years at what became Avaya. I needed market data. I needed to build my business case to fund the R&D for my product. And so I needed market sizing and market share and forecast. That data isn't out there either.
Well,
okay?
let me challenge you on that, Art. Let's take the Magic Quadrant, for example. There's a misconception out there that vendors sign up to be in the Magic Quadrant or they pay money to be in the Magic Quadrant and stuff like that. None of that's true. The way it works is they set some inclusion criteria, and you either meet that or you don't. And if you meet the inclusion criteria, you're in the Magic Quadrant. Now, what people don't realize is that the vendors don't really have a say in that. Sometimes they don't want to be in the Magic Quadrant, and Gartner will say, too bad, you're in it. And we're going to put you in it. So that means that in that situation, that Gartner has to get all that information from public channels because the vendor's not going to help them. We don't want to be in it. So
that's the Dave. I have dealt with a vendor in my career who said they don't want to be in, and I said, I don't care, you're in. And I had to put them in, and I had to do the best I could evaluating from public sources, which was hard to do. But what I did do to validate before publishing, I sent my analysis to the vendor and let them barf on it, okay? And have an interaction to get some level of validation. So it's rare when a vendor gets included, but they're not a participant. So you're putting a corner case out there, Dave. I still go back to AI scraping what's publicly available. Of course, we've got the debate about, we're scraping stuff that's copyrighted and violating copyrights and all that stuff. But we're talking vendor feature functionality, vendor performance, vendor customer satisfaction, vendor serviceability, vendor go-to-market channels, and all of that stuff. It ain't out there, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me do another edge case here.
Let me in here first. Let me jump in.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
From a couple of things, two kind of key points. One is, since I've been with the organization that I've been in, we have not turned down participation in a report today. You know why? Because when you choose not to participate in this process and you rely solely on public information, to Art's point, the result is garbage. And we as vendors do barf on it, because when it does come back, it is so grossly inaccurate that it doesn't represent anything that we do in the business. And I've seen that, which is to the second point. We've actually had two firms in recent months use AI to auto-populate a vendor survey. And let me tell you, we've got capabilities we could have never have dreamed of. There are core functionalities within our business that it absolutely missed, right? And there are these inaccuracies, and right, at some level, does a vendor misrepresent what they do and not correct the information when it serves them?
Chris, when does that ever happen?
Never, ever happen, right? And do you then correct where it doesn't show well for you, right? So it's not, the reality is it's going to get better over time, right? That's the reality that we're not getting away from. But in terms of where we are today, I wrote a piece about this a while back, and I got some flack about it. But when it relates to Gartner, I do believe the minute you remove the analyst from the core of this process, there is a grave mistake. And I don't think we are at a place where you're going to reduce that critical thinking to an engineered prompt anytime in the near future.
And let me go back
to
the comment in the video, Dave. Here we're talking about a CTO of a regional bank using ChatGPT to help with vendor selection. Is that going to happen? Absolutely. Okay. Because people are going to say, wait a minute, I pay this much for a Gartner or a Forrester or whatever, and on my own with my $20 a month subscription. So especially firms that don't buy from these market research firms, the small and mid-sized businesses. I mean, I met with a friend of mine who's a 35-year consultant in the contact center tech business. And she said she's got some clients. There was one that only has 25 seats in their contact center. And look, they're going to go get help. But, it's the expertise, it's the advisory, it's the consulting that goes along with this that really will continue to put the value add out there. So the black and white of they're dead, okay, versus the shades of gray are product marketing organizations at vendors writing their own white papers that they might have gone to a vendor to get a vendor stamp on it. Sure, okay. And is it going to reduce if they wanted to go to a branded market research firm for a branded paper? Would it reduce the effort and therefore the revenue and the profit? Sure. So there are these things that when you pull on all these threads of the business of IT market research, not just vendor selection, okay, there's places where, the firms that may be weak in terms of the depth of their bench of expertise going to get hammered. Okay.
All right, let me flip that. In the video, he talked about, you have this advisory relationship, and Gartner comes in and gives you this valuable insights he said stay-at-home mom as an analyst. Only Gartner has stay-at-home moms. Everybody else travels for a living. But the point that I want to make is that you could flip that and say, all right, I agree with you guys. The data is not available in the public domain, so you got to get the reports. So instead of spending, he said 120,000, instead of spending a full license for advisory, you get these individual reports. You get a Forrester, you get all the different reports out there. You load them into your own AI, and now you're just buying single user license reports, or you're getting them free because vendors make them free if they did well. And so you get these, you get 10 reports. Let's say you get 10 reports, you load them into your own AI. Now you're paying minimal cost for advisory and from an analyst firm. And now it's about the prompt, right? Now you just write a long prompt. I'm a mid-sized bank. I'm in these states. My priority is this. I have to expand into whatever country. Which solution is best for me? Is that going to work, Chris?
So I think the reality is we're going to get closer to that, and I think it's naive not to think that. I mean, there are some nuances to that, in terms of where the early wins are. So if you have multiple data points where you're looking at market share or sizing a market, or you've got questions that are similar in nature, right? And you can validate that because, right, we're kind of talking about one vendor at a time, right? When you start to bring these multiple organizations together into one data set, it becomes a little bit more powerful. And you will be able to query that data and get certain results, but you're still missing the nuance, right? It's giving you the answer to the question you're asking. It's not giving you the answer to the question you should be asking. And that's where the analyst comes into play. And that's just not something that AI necessarily anywhere in the short term is really going to understand in the same way that person that has 15 years of experience of looking vendors and looking buyers in the face to understand what they really mean.
And there's another subtlety in here, Dave. If you just gobbled up 10 market research reports, which, well, that's going to cost too, and throw it into your own AI and, out of that, get some sort of assessment. Sometimes when I would do Magic Quadrants or Forrester Waves, I would have to evaluate a feature that was more pixie dust than it was reality, okay? This is the latest thing and everyone must have it, okay? And it would actually influence a buying decision. And then ultimately, when you looked at it play out in the market, barely anybody used the darn thing, okay? So in that dialogue with a customer, if they're going to over-rotate on that pixie dust feature, some of the advice is, where will you really use it? Is it something that you're actually capable of managing? Take Intelligent Agent Desktop a number of years ago. That was sort of at the top of the heap for a while. But that takes a lot of in-house work to really get those things to work and make them effective. And there are only certain scenarios where that was really needed. So it's that consultative advice with someone who's got years of experience to kind of help you through that. Now, I'll do one more comment on years of experience. I am concerned, and I think it will impact the ranks of analysts that have years of expertise. An analyst starts out, not knowing nothing, okay? They get into a firm, they start out as a junior research assistant, and I remember at Forrester, because we were close located to many colleges in Boston, we'd bring on college students. And over the years, some of our top analysts were some who joined as, lowly research assistants. That work that those research assistants do is going to get disintermediated by AI. So this, how are we building the bench over time? I don't know how you do that in terms of cutting off the bottom of the career ladder and not having people climbing that ladder to have that expertise to create.
Well, it's an interesting question, Art, because now I would say the top of the ladder is getting cut off because, I don't know if it's AI or not, but mentioned in the video that Gartner stock had gone down. We have seen, I think IDC just had a pretty big cutback. We've seen some firms completely disappear. We've seen some increased M&A activities in the analyst space. What do you think is causing that? Is it AI or is it something else?
Well, Chris, you go first.
Yeah. So here's the thing. When I think about this, I think about the time when airline ticketing went from in airport at a station, you had to go to the airport and buy your ticket. All of a sudden you can buy tickets online, and all of these agents were out of a job, right? They were decimated by the web, right? That is the critical moment that we are in now. There are going to be jobs that go away, but if you look at that same scenario, there are more flights today than ever before, right? There are more baggage jobs, handler jobs, contact center positions to manage this increase in online ticketing, right? It served as a springboard to a whole plethora of new opportunity. So I think we are at that moment with analysts in general. The piece that I'm trying to advocate so hard for is the analyst firms out there, if they don't recognize what their value is, which for me is all about the analyst and the intelligence that they bring, right? The ones that do it well and will survive and thrive will figure out how to put that analyst at the core, because that at the end of the day is why people buy, regardless of Gartner's stock, right? The folks that are funding that organization are buying for that intelligence. And organizations need to wrap their arms around that and give these guys one hell of a bear hug.
So a couple comments, Dave, from personal experience. We're talking about years of expertise here. If I go back to when I opened my first computer manual, it was in 1964. So, I'm an old guy, and I retired 3 years ago. So at the top of that pyramid, you do have a number of analysts who are towards the end of their careers, and you're seeing retirements. I met with a couple of them in Denver, and they've all gone on their journey, some founding some small consulting firms or whatever. But there's that element that, at least within my peer community, some of us have gotten older and some of us have retired. The second thing is, in this hype bubble of AI, where there is pressure, there's investor pressure, okay, saying you need to cut headcount because of AI, whether or not the damn thing's going to work, okay, you need to cut headcount. And there may be instances where, the people with the more experience are the people with the bigger paychecks. So there might be a inappropriate, in my opinion, decision to cut at the top and force more of this work on lower paid workers, which to me would be a big mistake. Because back to Chris's point, you're dependent upon the years of expertise and that advisory and consulting. And I want to emphasize again, it's not just advisory for vendors to talk to them about their product roadmaps, their distribution, you name it, but it's also the advisory to the end users that, what do you need? What can you use? Where's the market going, and so on.
You're touching on something interesting there. I guess I'm going to use the word credibility. Some analyst firms have more credibility than others. Obviously, Talking Points is kind of on top of the heap there, but the point that really is I want to make is that I'm not sure how AI differentiates. How is this AI report different than that AI report? And Chris said earlier about, AI can only get the data that it can get. I'm worried that a lot of the data it's going to get is AI generated data, right? And so in this loop. And so how does I guess I don't know what the question is there, but there seems to, I'm not sure how AI addresses credibility or experience is the word you're using, but
I'm going to go even further on that, Dave. I'm now seeing a term called work slop.
Yep.
Okay. And that someone's given an assignment, they produce some output using AI, they send it up the food chain, and up the food chain, they say, this, my niece, she's Dartmouth grad, Harvard grad, very smart. She's CEO of a small startup, and she can spot AI a mile away. And whether it's good or it's just work slop, okay, it lacks the credibility and depth of a well-written, well-thought-through piece. But the credibility question, and you're bringing up a whole other one, Dave, which is a favorite one of mine. We're sucking our own exhaust. AI is sucking its own exhaust. Okay, it's coming out the tailpipe and it's going right back into the engine. And this recursive nature, I think, quite frankly, and I don't have any research to show this, but I think this is one element that creates hallucinations. That you get this AI-generated data that then goes back into the mill and goes around and around and around. And if nobody's looking at it, it starts to become truth because it's gone around and around and around 50 billion times.
But I think that comes back to, how do organizations responsibly approach, AI? Do you have it in your own container, right? So that you at some level can control what goes in and what doesn't. And there are guys, I mean, I know we tend to be, I guess, advocating a little bit for analyst over AI, but there are some things that it can be used for, right? So one of the things that I use it for in my role is I look at mentions, right? What are the analysts talking about in the market, right? Is the collective analyst community using a word that resonates in the market different than how do we use it? Maybe our message would land better if we pivoted, right? That's something that that I couldn't do in an inquiry with one analyst, right? That would require 20 analysts and written inquiries, and there are definitely things that can speed or allow us to understand things in different ways. And that's where I do think there's going to be some impact, but to the point in the dialogue that you guys are having here, a lot of it's going to come down to how and why, and what your willingness or your propensity to accept that work that's less than standard versus the investment your organization's willing to make.
Your use case, Chris, is awesome because this is stuff that is available out there. And putting my VP of marketing or product marketing hat on that I had for a number of years, your sales force is faced with customers who are talking about X. And let's, for example, throw the term out, agentic AI. All right. A very powerful, influential company put weight, Salesforce, behind agentic AI. So then you face the question of, oh, wait a minute, do we chase that one? What is it? What do we have our product teams do? What do we do from a market positioning perspective? So that use case of getting in on the keyword phrases, conversations in the marketplace, and are we missing out? Is there an opportunity here somewhere? I think that's an awesome use case, Chris.
Yeah.
What both of you keep on bringing up is really opinion. You're bringing up insights, opinion. You're bringing up, Art talked about the pixie dust stuff. We'll pick on our cousins over the financial analysts. They're very limited in what they can do in an opinion by law, and they are largely going off of data that is publicly available from public companies. Those guys seem to be probably more threatened, in my opinion, from an AI generation. But the industry analysts that we're talking about here, it's if anything, it sounds like we should be doubling down much more on opinion and really trying to correlate dots that may not be readily aligned. Is that a reasonable conclusion?
This is my opinion at its core, right? This is, if these analyst organizations are going to survive this era that is AI, that is where it's going to win the battle, right? You have to rely on the expertise of an analyst. And don't get me wrong, I advocate for the analyst, day in and day out. I mean, at some level, I don't have a job without these guys. But the reality is, it's not always roses, right? You get on a phone with an analyst and you spread your pixie dust, and the arts of the world tell you that what you just shared for the last hour is garbage. And not the reality, right? That's not something that can happen within AI, right? So you've got to have that opinion. That's what we rely on as a vendor. We pay for that insights, that sniff test, if you will, and that's not something that I believe. Or let me say it differently. Not that they won't survive. I believe analyst firms that do it well will capitalize on that component of it, because that's where they're going to win.
I think, Dave, I know you often use the word opinion, and that, analysts sometimes are like movie reviewers, which I think is a little derogatory. So I take issue with that. At the end of the day, I think that I want to use the word informed opinion, leveraging expertise instead of just writing a review. Okay. And that's what Chris and his firm have spent money on. The analysts that they bring in for deeper dive conversations are the ones who have that informed opinion and have those years of expertise. And this we continue to beat this drum in this podcast, but that's the drum, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the movie reviewer analogy is meant to make it more accessible for people. But the point is, because I often hear, this analyst is wrong. It's like, well, you can't be wrong. It's his opinion. You can disagree with the opinion, but you can't be necessarily wrong. But yes, the more informed, the better the opinion. And I get what your point. So let me ask you, how does AI change the analyst business? Do analysts become, extraordinary prompt writers? Does the reports that we generate, we talked about the Magic Quadrant and the Forrester Wave, those are annual reports. Do those reports now become quarterly with AI? How do you envision AI impacting the industry analysts?
I'm not responding to a survey quarterly, so let's just put that to bed now. There's not going to be a Magic Quadrant wave. But listen, when I think about it, I think about it like this. Imagine, these strategy sessions, whether it's a vendor or whether it's a buyer, and buyers, use them as well. But imagine stepping into a meeting, having the first 10 questions already answered for you, right? When you step into that session, right, you've got your homework done, and now you can begin the conversation at a much deeper, much richer level. And instead of that analyst having to educate everyone on very fundamental or basic things, AI can help expedite that conversation to make it a far more rewarding and beneficial conversation. Those are things that will happen. And we can actually then, instead of spending 8 hours with the first 4 of it doing baseline kind of work, we can step into that and have a full set of 8 hours of really rich, deep, and broad conversations. That's the kind of things I'm looking forward to when it comes to analysts and how they may leverage AI in the future.
I think, Dave, there's a labor component here. And yes, AI is going to displace human labor and we're off to the races. So as a tool, I go back to the days of, okay, I got to write a report. Well, I'm sitting there at my laptop with writer's block and, can't get myself started. And yes, I've made the case that the data isn't necessarily out there, but, leveraging AI as a writing tool, or as when I would submit my reports to our editing team to do copy editing and corrections and fact checking. My editorial team is going to be using AI. I mean, I can guarantee that the leading firms are already doing this. And so there's a labor component here, which could have an impact on costs and therefore profitability. I think that the actual analytical work, thinking of my inquiries and thinking of my deeper consulting projects, there's probably elements there as well. If I did an end user strategy day I will send to them in advance an assessment questionnaire and have them get as many people as possible to fill out the assessment of their contact center and their operations. Certainly, I could see that AI would help me gobble up those assessment surveys and pour through it and provide some insights. In fact, even take the darn thing and produce 4 PowerPoint charts for me that regurgitate the summarization of that data. So back to the labor component of the work that I do.
Do you think there could be a change in business model? One of the things that's happening with social media, for example, is what stands out is how provocative it is. It's not a matter of how informative or insightful, it's a matter of how provocative it is. Do you foresee something like, let's take the Magic Quadrant again, since we've been talking about it, that they would only publish the graphic and make that freely available outside the paywall? But if you wanted the narrative, that would be behind the paywall, or you have, do you see a different way of giving information to the AI bots that would start a conversation as opposed to keeping it all behind a paywall?
Yeah,
Thoughts
Dave,
on that?
let me give you a slightly different example, if you don't mind. When I think about this model and how analyst organizations can benefit or leverage it. I think actually about the Forrester business technographics work, right? They do this survey in an ongoing way, and there's literally a million different cuts by size of business, by vertical, by region, right? You can literally just, ask until your heart's desired, right? But every time you do that, right, you have to reach out to someone, you have to give them your specifications. Then from there, they have to go and do the data cut. And then they bring it back to you. I would love a model where I could go in and query the data to expedite the turnaround time and provide those insights through an automated workflow where I could say, deliver the financial services for, Illinois and their buying criteria on a quarterly basis, where once that information's in there, I can step out of it and it delivers it to the folks that's needs. And I can see them monetizing or commercializing that through AI. And I think there's probably other use cases when it comes to that. But I think a lot of it's going to be based on the data that they collect. And who knows, maybe it actually even takes us back closer to pure survey research houses. When you think back, Art, you were there. Yankee, was such a pure research firm. Maybe we actually, maybe the pendulum swings back and we really start looking at how we query data and make sure that the data is stronger than the actual information that's out there in the general domain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Chris, I was at Gartner just after we had acquired DataQuest. So
yeah.
I know very well that data component of it, and data, clean data that's scrubbed, data that, has to be interpolated is really super important. So that's an interesting trajectory, Chris. I think every one of the firms that I worked at, there was always the teaser that would generate interest, that would generate okay, now they got to go through the paywall kind of thing. And, was there any science behind those decisions, what we put outside, what we keep inside, the internal debates, the, discussions with marketing and Salesforce. And then Dave, your point is putting a bit more of it out there and allowing AI to munch on it. Sure. Is that really a huge change in business model? It's still putting a teaser out there that, puts some of the value that generates enough interest. So basically, this is a lead gen thing, and letting AI munch on the lead gen data. But I still think that the pathway for the market research firms is to still drive the revenue that would lie underneath it.
Okay. Well, I think we can go on for a while, but I think this is a good place to stop. It's an amazing topic and an evolving topic. We know from our friend Sam Altman, I invited him to be on, but he couldn't make it. But we know from Sam Altman that he says that OpenAI has even amazing stuff in the labs that they don't have enough resources to bring to market yet. So the story is going to keep on changing with new iterations of AI, new expectations from the public, and of course, incredibly new capabilities from the vendors that we cover. So this is an ongoing story. So maybe we'll come back next year and see how we can update it. But I want to thank you both so much for participating in this video and this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for the invite, Dave. Pleasure to do it.
You bet.